Hi everyone, welcome to today's video. I'm Lisa from Down to Earth Gardening and Design, and what a lovely day in the garden because the peonies are starting to appear. So they're just popping up, and I do have to say, side note, every day is a lovely day in the garden. But today's video is on how to set your peonies up for success in the spring. So some spring care, some easy tips for your peonies to do in the springtime. There's so many tasks to do in the garden right now, but once I see these popping up, I want to get right out here and just tackle some basic tasks. And I have 4 main tips that will really help them be successful and beautiful. Because peonies, if they're treated properly, planted properly, and you just do a couple of things to them, they can last for decades. I know people that are enjoying their grandmother's peonies in their garden. So that's pretty fantastic. What a great investment and what a wonderful flower to pass down through future generations. So peonies do great in the garden, and they're also really stunning in bouquets. My daughter and kids and I spent a lot of time clipping some pretty bouquets, and so I just thought it would be nice to show you what we do in the spring to really get them going and give them the edge. So number one, I want to say that we're talking about herbaceous peonies, and there are 3 main types of peonies. So the herbaceous, there's the tree peonies, and there's the Ito peonies. So 3 main types, and today we're just talking about the herbaceous peonies. So I have 3 plants in front of me here, and I'm just going to walk you through what I do as I'm doing it, because like I said, there's pretty much 4 main tips that I have for you today. But number one, I want to say, is really about just backing the mulch away when you start seeing them and giving them some fertilizer. So I want to qualify this. The peonies in front of me, they are newbies. I just planted these a couple of years ago, and you may have seen the video on planting the peonies in the fall that I did on these beauties. So I am going to give them a little edge with some fertilizer, but if you have established peonies in your garden, don't worry about fertilizing them unless you see something weird's going on. They're not flowering as well as they should be. So keep in mind your peonies should have about 6 hours of full sun. They'll take a little bit of dappled shade, but for the most part they are sun lovers. So my biggest tip is to don't mess with a good thing. So if they're doing great, don't fertilize them. It's not necessary. But the newbies take about 3 years if you're planting them from the tubers to flower. So I just want to give my newbies a little edge. So I tend to do this when they're 1, 2, and 3 years old. So what I do is I just take my fingers and I'm just pulling away a little of the mulch. So we like to put on a little extra mulch for protection for the winter here in New England, because I am in Connecticut. I'm in planting zone 6B. So I like to pull it away. And that will give me some space here to do a little bit of amending. So you can go ahead and use your compost, but I also like to use bone meal. And that's because there's a lower concentration of nitrogen in the bone meal. So it is mainly phosphorus and calcium, which is really great for root development and for your blooming flowers. So I'm going to use a little bit of this. So just go ahead and put this down at the rate that's recommended on the back of the package. And always remember, when it comes to any type of amendments, I always say less is more. So I have my gloves on and I'm just going to sprinkle. I would guess I'm doing a teaspoon or a little more around the edge. And then I'm just going to go ahead and scuffle it in a little bit with my little hand tool. Okay, and so that's it. We're just going to water that in. So my number 2 tip with your peony is don't move it. Really refrain from moving your peonies. Springtime is a great time to divide a lot of things and move things around, and I always tell my clients and friends that gardens aren't really static, so they are meant to evolve and develop. So I like to divide, add things, move things around. This is one of the plants that I like to plant it and leave it alone. It really just doesn't transplant well. So that's tip number 2, leave it alone, unless of course it has not been flowering for at least 2 years. If it really doesn't look healthy or hasn't been flowering, then yes, I would go ahead and move it and try maybe a sunnier location and some well-drained soil with compost mixed in. But for the most part, don't move them. Don't touch them if they're doing great. So number 3 tip is, and I have to chuckle a little bit here because I'm throwing tools around, and my husband, who has been videoing me, stepped on these. So I want to talk a lot about caging your peonies. So the number 1 reason to cage your peonies is to keep them from flopping over. So are they still going to be healthy if you don't cage them? Yes. However, your flowers are going to flop over and they're going to hit the ground, they're going to get wet, and they're going to fade a whole lot quicker. And we want to preserve them, enjoy them in the garden, or like I said, in beautiful bouquets. So they're so heavy, you get such large blooms that you want to cage them. And there's a couple of ways to do it, but this is the best time to do it because they're just popping up and you're not struggling with all the stems and the foliage and the precious buds. So I do have a video out on if you lose track of time and they're already up and budded and you need to cage them. There's some ways to do it without struggling too much. But the best time to put your cages up or your rings is early spring when they start popping up. So there's a couple different cages that I do like, and this is one of them. This tends to be a little sturdier and I like the grit on the top, but this one is economical and pretty sturdy, and I use a lot of these. Now, with that said, in a pinch, you can just use a tomato cage, because when these peonies really flourish, it's gonna hide the cages. So I wouldn't worry too much if you don't have a bunch of these rings or some decorative rings. Just go ahead and use a tomato cage. But the point is to get it in the ground as soon as they pop up. So getting it in the ground can sometimes be a little bit of a struggle because we're in New England and the soil has a lot of rocks in it. So my trick is I will tend to point these in closer to the peony because I know that when we've planted them, we've dug around them for planting. So chances are we've removed the rocks as you get closer to the plant. So that's why you see me edging them in a little. So the other reason to cage your peonies is you can see where they are when they first start coming up. Like I said, my husband sadly stepped on it and crushed one of them here. It's going to be okay. And I'm out here throwing tools around, and I'm guilty too because I had this little hand tool lying on them. They will pop back, but if you have the cage, you won't make that mistake. Okay, so number 4 tip, and the last one is kind of a 2-part tip, and it is about watering, also very important. So part 1 of watering is going to be the how. So when you water your peonies, water around the drip line or just around the base of the plant, and continue doing that as it grows and it leaves out. And the reason for that is you don't want to water the leaves. The leaves, if they're wet, then they have more of a chance of having mildew. And so you've all maybe seen some peonies with mildew leaves, and it's not only unattractive, but it's really not going to help the plant thrive, and that's what we really want. So no diseases, and just to lessen the risk of that, you want to avoid watering the leaves and just water the ground around them. So part two of the watering is how much do we water the peonies? Well, it's spring, it's New England, and we do get a lot of rain right now. So typically I don't worry about it too much. However, if we get a dry spell in the spring, it's when they're first coming up, they need a little more attention. You want to maybe, if it's established, give them a water one time every 7 days, a really good water. And if it's a newbie and it's getting established, a little bit more, so about an inch of water a week. And I would check on it a couple of times a week. If it's dry, if we get rain, you're in the clear. So watering can be tricky because overwatering can cause root rot. Our peonies don't like to sit in wet conditions, and not enough water will cause them to be stressed and wilt. So you really want to pay attention to that because, man, we are excited for some peonies here. So that's it for today. I've given you 4 tips and they're really great tips for you. And so I appreciate all of you joining me, and thank you again. If you like the video, please go ahead and tap like and hit subscribe to our channel because it's springtime and we have a lot more gardening videos coming your way.